Hello, welcome to my channel. So basically we are looking to read this book called Malleus Maleficarum, and the words, right, this actual wording was told to me by Mr. Motorhead, who told me they used to torture people. They had torture devices, how to torture people in Christianity, especially for the witches. So I looked it up, and it looks like this whole idea of Malleus Maleficarum was a manual written by one of the church fathers or something on how to identify a witch and how to torture them, to get confessions. And it talks about, and this book was responsible for many witches, for many people being accused of being witches and being burnt at the stake. Right? So, one second. Where are we? Yeah. So, I'm looking for this book actually. One second. Household story. I have that, so I can exit this. Let's go and look up this word here for fun. Right? See what comes up. Right? Where are we? Here we are. Is it even working? Hold on. Right. See what comes up. Right. Okay. So. Let me turn off this light because it's just too bright for my eye at this time. And let's go see what comes up. Okay, let's go and read a little thing into it, and then we can really get into it. Right? So, Malleus Maleficarum. Detailed legal. This book is a book of legal and theological document. It's in detail, written in 1486. It's regarded as the standard handbook on witchcraft, including its detection and its extirpation. Until well into the 18th century, its appearance did much to spur on and sustain some 2 centuries of witch hunting hysteria in Europe. The Malleus was the work of 2 Dominicans, Jacob Spenger, Dean of the University of Cologne in Germany, and Heinrich Institutorius Kraemer, Professor of Theology and University of Salzburg, Austria, and Inquisitor in the Tyrol region of Austria in 1484. Pope Innocent III issued the bull Summus Desiderantis Affectibus, in which he deplored the spread of witchcraft in Germany and authorized Spenger and Kraemer to extirpate it. So I don't know what extirpate means. Let's go check. Extirpate. It needs to destroy the witches. The Malleus codified the folklore and beliefs of the Alpine peasants and was dedicated to the implementation of Exodus 22.18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. The work is divided into 3 parts. In part 1, the reality and the depravity of witches is emphasized, and any disbelief in demonology is condemned as heresy. Because of the nature of the enemy, any witness, no matter what his credentials, may testify against an accused. Part 2 is a compendium of fabulous stories about the activities of witches, diabolical compacts, sexual relations with devils, incubi and succubi, right? Transvection, night riding, and metamorphosis. What is metamorphosis? Let's go check what that is, my friends. God, the superstition back in the day is just, it's a biological process involved in drastic change in an animal's body structure, right, to morph into something after hatching or birth, often including changes in its physiology, behavior, and nutrition. So it's like it's trying to say about how a witch can morph into whatever, right? Part 3 is a discussion of the legal procedures to be followed in witch trials. Torture is sanctioned as a means of securing confessions. Lay and secular authorities are called upon to assist inquisitors in the task of exterminating those whom Satan has enlisted in his cause. The Malleus went through 28 editions between 1486 and 1600 and was accepted by Roman Catholics and Protestants alike as an authoritative source of information concerning Satanism and as a guide to Christian defense. You know, so then it goes on to explain how people were ostracized and accused as being witches and all that, right? So we're going to be reading this book, right? Here's a picture of it. And without further ado, shall we get into it? Shall we get into it, my friends? Right. Hi, Motorhead. This is something that you suggested, so I found the book. This book is basically on how to find witches, and this is like the official book to go to for the legal process of finding a witch and killing them, right? But you said it was more of a torture method, right? But this is actually an entire thing. It's not just a torture tool. It's a whole book explaining, right? Watch Comedy History of the World Part 1 has Inquisition, Monty Python. Oh, I love Monty Python, right? Hi, Wattis. Have we started the crazy church trial responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of women? Many maniacs have exorcisms today still. Yeah, exactly. Anyway. First of all, who wants to see the flowers that I bought for myself? Who likes it? Who likes my flowers that I bought for myself? I don't know if you guys can see. They're very delicate. Right? I don't know if you guys can see how beautiful they are. You know? You know? I'm the only one that can buy myself satisfactory flowers. Because that's besides the point, you know what I mean? Okay. Details of torture devices are online. Sick, perverted freaks and raped children for centuries in Catholic churches. Yeah, exactly. So the details are in this book that we're going to read now, right? Luther and Calvin also burnt alive heretics. Yeah, so my neighbors are having some sort of event. Maybe a birthday party. I don't know. Because they're outside my window and I don't know. There's a lot of action going on here. There's a lot of like kids activities and let me get my tea. 1 second. We're gonna get into it in a minute. Patience, my dears. Patience, my dears. Oh my God! Seriously? I can't believe this. Literally, I can't believe this. I basically turned on the hot water urn without having it plugged in. And no, not that one. Hold on. Okay, 1 second. I thought I made myself tea, but I thought I turned on the hot water urn, it wasn't plugged in, and I actually made my tea. I poured it in and I put the lemon and the honey and everything. And I poured the water in and I thought, okay, I'm waiting for it to cool off. But then I just checked it and it was cold water. So that got me a little bit annoyed. So now I have to go in. What is this? Hold on. Basilicus. The happiness, sound, simple joy. Exactly. See, these are the beauties that give color to your work. My flowers. Am I near? Ugh, it's rotten. Everything in my fridge is going rotten, and I don't know why. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really don't know why. Yeah. These are gonna go rotten. Everything in my fridge is literally like, it goes off so fast and I don't know what to do. Like, I buy stuff, but there's no point because it just goes off. Okay, I'll waste my money. Patience, my friends. Patience. Gosh, I thought I was so smart, you know. I thought I had my tea ready. It looked like I was... Patience, my friends. We're gonna get into it. Y'all know that for us to get into something, we find beginners are really good. Right? It's really good. Listen, I bought myself flowers because I said to myself, in my lifetime, there were only 2 men out of all the men I dated. There were only 2 men that actually brought me flowers. One because I asked them. The other one brought me on his own voluntarily, but the flowers that he chose weren't blossomed. They weren't beautiful, and they fell off its stem before it even got a chance to sprout and blossom. And so, right? And so I said to myself, yesterday I was in the mall, no, the day before, I don't remember, I was thinking to myself how I really want flowers. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just want to have it in my house, and I want to smell it, and I want to be able to look at it and enjoy my flowers, right? And out of all the men that I dated, one brought me flowers voluntarily, another one I asked, and that there's, out of all the men I dated, none thought to bring me flowers. So I was like thinking to myself, like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I had like if I had a guy that would bring me flowers, how nice would that be? And it would be so romantic. And I said to myself, you know what, the men are a disappointment. I can buy myself flowers. You know, like, you have the song, I can buy myself flowers, right? I said to myself, why should I wait for someone else to make me happy? Why? Why should I wait to make myself happy? Why should I wait for someone else to make me happy? If I like flowers, I should buy for myself. I don't need to wait for some stupid guy to come up with the brilliant idea, like as if it's some sort of scientific breakthrough that, hey, girls like flowers and it's a nice gesture. I have to wait for a guy to come up with the idea because they're just so smart. These men, they're just so brilliant. And when they think it's about to get you flowers, Either they rip it out of the ground, or they bring you dead flowers that don't sprout. So I said to myself, I'm allowed to make myself happy. So I went and I bought myself flowers. Okay? And so now I'm enjoying them. Anyway, let's get on with it, shall we? Introduction. So let's go see the first page, right? Here, let's show you the page. Because the men are so brilliant, they can't even think up for themselves that, you know, hey, it's a romantic thing to get a girl flowers. Like, wow, who would ever know, you know, like, it's a nice thing to bring a girl flowers on a date. Oh, wow, they can't be bothered. They don't want to waste money on a woman. Malleus maleficarum. So it's translated, right? This is a translation. Innocence V2, no, V3, Papa, Gen Vents, Vests, Vensis. Malleus maleficarum. Translated with an introduction, bibliography, and notes by the Reverend Montague Summers. John Rod Kerr, publisher, 1928. This edition of Malleus maleficarum, comprising 1275 numbered 1,275 numbered copies, is here translated to English from the edition of 1489 for the first time. The book is printed by Messrs. R. Clay and Sons, Ltd., Bungay, Suffolk, on a Dutch paper, especially made for the edition. This copy is number 417. Here's a note of contents. Right, so the first part is treating of the three necessary concomitants of witchcraft, which are the devil, a witch, and the permission of Almighty God. And then there is the second part, which is treating of the methods by which the works of witchcraft are wrought and directed, and how they may be successfully annulled and dissolved. The third part is relating to the judicial proceedings in both the ecclesiastical and civil courts against witches and indeed all heretics. Introduction. Yeah, this is gonna get good. It's probably very interesting, my friend. Very interesting. Right? The course is Phi. Hi. The cat bro attends every class on the time. You grabbed your coffee and you came. You are so obsessed with her videos. Okay, interesting. Alright. It has been recognized, even from the very earliest times, during the first gropings towards essential conveniences of social decency and social order, that witchcraft is an evil thing, an enemy to light. This is according to the Christians of that day that were hunting down the witches. An ally of the powers of darkness, disruption, and decay. Sometimes, no doubt, primitive communities were obligated to tolerate the witch and her works, owing to fear. In other words, witchcraft was a kind of blackmail. But directly cities were able to coordinate, and it became possible for society to protect itself. Precautions were taken, and safeguards were instituted against this curse. This bane whose object seemed to blight all that was fair, all that was just and good, and that all that was well appointed and honorable. In a word, whose aim proved to set up on high the red standard of revolution, to overwhelm religion, existing order, and the comeliness of life in an abyss of anarchy, nihilism, and despair. In this great treatise, De Ciutate Deis, Augustine set forth the theory, or rather the living fact, of the two cities, the city of God and the opposing strong hold of all that is not for God, that is to say, of all that is against him. This seems to be a natural truth, which the inspired doctor has so eloquently demonstrated in his mighty pages, and even before the era of Christianity, men recognized the verity, and nations who had never heard the divine command put into practice the obligation of the Mosaic maxim, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Vulgate. Maleficus non patieris, uer due. Wizards thou shalt not suffer to live. Exodus XX 2.18. It is true that both in the Greek and the earlier Roman cults, the worship, often directly derived from secret and somber sources, ancient gods, or rather demons, had their awful superstitions and their hard rites. Power whom men dreaded, but out of very terror placated. Fanes men loathed, but within those shadowed portals they bent and bowed the knee, perforce, in trembling fear. Such deities were the Thracian Bendis, whose manifestation was heralded by the howling of her fierce black hounds, and Hecate, the terrible queen of the realm of ghosts, as Euripides calls her, and the vampire Mormo, and the dark Simanos, who at midnight hurled loud thunderbolts and launched a deadly levin through the starless sky. Pliny tells us that the worship of these mysterious deities lasted long, and dogs with their puppies were sacrificed to him with atrocious cruelty. But Saint Augustine says that in his day one could scarce find one within a while that had heard, nay more, that had read so much as the name of Simanus. Nevertheless, there is only too much reason to believe that this devil god had his votaries, although his liturgy was driven underground and his supplicants were obliged to assemble in remote and secret places. Towards the end of the 5th century, the Carthaginian Martianus Capella boldly declares that Simanos is none other than the Lord of Hell, and he was writing, it may be remembered, only a few years before the birth of Saint Benedict. The influence of this saint over the dark powers was very remarkable, and he is especially venerated as Effugator Daemonum. The medal of Saint Benedict has been found to be extremely potent against all evil spells. During a trial for witchcraft in 1647 at Nattenberg, near the Abbey of Metten in Bavaria, the sorcerers acknowledged that their attempts against the monks were foiled by the holy medal. The possessed boys of Ilfurt, Alsace, 1864 to 1869, exhibited the utmost dread of St. Benedict's medal. Some think that he was still alive when the father of all monks was born, although in Greek states the prosecution of witches was rare. In large measure owing to their dread that inspired, yet cases were not unknown. For Theoris, a woman of Lemos, who is denounced by Demosthenes, was publicly tried at Athens and burnt for her necromancy. It is perhaps not impertinent to observe that many strange legends attached to the island of Lemnos, which is situated in the Aegean Sea, near midway between Mount Athos and the Hellespont. It is one of the largest of the group, having an area of some 147 square miles. Lemnos was sacred to Hephaestus, who is said to have fallen here when hurled by Zeus from Olympus. So what's with Zeus and the Olympus? Right? Where are we? I'm not the part of the Machiavellism. He or she, the way you are talking does not look like bro. Machiavelli is a effective evil in history. Relics became tourist attractions. Body parts often of those tortured, killed by the church. Yeah. So, The workshops of the smith god in an ancient legend were supposed to be on the island, although recent geologists deny that this area was ever volcanic, and the fires which are spoken of as issuing from it must be considered gaseous. Later, the officinae of Hephaestus were placed in Sicily and the Lipari Islands, particularly Hiera. The worship of Hephaestus in later days seems to have degenerated and to have been identified with some of the secret cults of the evil powers. Oh no, go back. This was probably due to his connection with fire and also to his extreme ugliness, for he was frequently represented as a swarthy man of grim and forbidden aspect. It should further be noted that the old Italian deity, Vulcanus, with whom he was to be identified, is the god of destructive fire, fire considered in its rage and terror, as contrasted with fire, which is comfort to the human race. The kindly blaze on the hearth, domestic fire, presided over by the gracious lady Vesta. It is impossible not to think of the fall of Lucifer when one considers the legends of Hephaestus. Our Lord replied when the disciples reported, Domine etiam demonia labeciuntur nobis in nomine tuo. Lord, the devils also are subject to us in thy name. Uidembam satanam sicut fulcur de coelo cadentem. I saw Satan like lightning falling from the heaven, and Isaiah says, Quomodo sesidisti de coelo Lucifer qui main aurea baris, coruisti in terram qui ulnerabas gentes. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, who didst rise in the morning? How art thou fallen to the earth, that didst wound the nations? Milton also has the following poetic allusion. Nor was his name unheard or unandored. In ancient Greece and in Ausonian land, men called him Mulciber, and how he fell from heaven, they fabled, thrown by angry Jove? Sheer o'er the crystal battlements, from morn to noon, he fell from noon to dewy eve, a summer's day, and with the setting sun, dropped from the zenith like a falling star on Lemnos the Aegean ill. Thus they relate, erring, for he with his rebellious rout fell long before, nor aught availed him now to have built in heaven high towers, nor did he escape by all his engines, but was headlong sent with his industrious crew to build in hell. Hephaestus, especially in later days, is represented with one leg shortened to denote his lameness. He's lame. And throughout the Middle Ages, it was popularly believed that his cloven hoof was the one feature which the devil was unable to disguise. In this connexion, Loki, the Vulcan of Northern Europe, will be readily remembered. Friedrich Hall writes, Hephaestus, Vulcan, and Loki, each lame from some deformity of foot, in time joined natures with the pens and satires of the upper world. The lame sooty blacksmith donned their goat-like extremities of cloven hoofs, tail and horns, and the black dwarfs became uncouth ministers of this sooty black foul fiend. If ever mortal man accepted the services of these cunning metal workers, it was for some sinister purpose, and at a fearful price, no less than that of the soul itself, bartered away in contract of red blood, the emblem of life and the color of fire. You know, it's very interesting because here it describes like all these people who are like of the devil and all that stuff as like dwarfs and all these like deformed type of people, and that makes me feel like maybe, just maybe, they thought that dwarfs, if someone was born into a dwarf, you know, they would be accused of being some sort of witch or something, you know, like if you look any different from the regular society, you can be accused of being a bad person and a witch and demonic and killed, you know. The Oracle of Delphi, where young women went for advice to find a husband, etc. Machiavelli is an effective evil in history. Because isn't that like what they say? Like, oh, he's Machiavellian. This person is Machiavellian. Right? Like, isn't that something that they say? Right? Like, and you're saying that it comes with a whole story. Right? Niccolo Machiavelli, who's this? He was best known for his political treatise, The Prince to Principle, written around 1513. I don't understand. Machiavelli. Why good people make terrible leaders. There's one guy who writes about this guy. Machiavellian. So there's a guy who had certain beliefs. Like, I don't understand. Right? Relics became tourist attractions, right? Or young women went for advice to find a husband. If even the royal family is subjected to such accusation, there's no need to even question suspicion directed at other women in important detail. Henry V, in the autumn of 1419, prosecuted his stepmother Joanne of Navarre for attempting to kill him by witchcraft in the most horrible manner that one could devise. Insanity in Europe and Russia until 1800s, because of the Enlightenment came and and put aside all those like crazy ideas. Bad times to live and be happy. Yeah. Lucifer, morning star, means Venus in Greek. Dante's Inferno popularized devil, spooks, hell, etc. in the Middle Ages. Nonsense. Invented to terrify and manipulate people. She is Samarin in Africa. Lamia in Canaan, and Ugarit, Lotan, and the seven-headed serpent. Mythical archetypes derived from humanity's oldest ancient instincts. It seems like a lot of their accusations is probably accusing people of being just regular pagan. Machiavellism means lie, smear opponents, vicious attacks on political opponents to win. So then why do they use his name? Do you know what I mean? This guy. Because he's such a bad guy. So he became known. Anyone that does bad things gets known as, oh, it became like a word in the dictionary, right? It is a name in Sumerian and Babylonian Tannan. Okay. Okay. Back to Malleus Maleficarum. There are also dark histories of murder and blood connected with Lemnos. When the Argonauts landed here, they found it inhabited only by Amazons, who, having murdered all their husbands, had chosen as their queen Hypsipyle, daughter of Thoas, whom she secretly preserved alive. When this was discovered, the unfortunate woman was compelled to leave the island, and being subsequently captured by pirates, she was sold to Lycurgus, king of the sacred groves that surrounded the temple of Zeus, Nemeus, in a remote Argive valley. Hypsipyle here became the nurse of the mysterious child, Archemoris, the forerunner of death, who was bitten by a magic serpent and vanished, portending the doom of the seven who went against Thebes. So here it talks about serpents as well, right? Lucifer, morning star, is a fictional narrative. In the Babylon era, it was an extension of Achiram taken by the Zoroastrians, a snake-bodied woman in Anatolia. Machiavellism means lie, smear, and opponents to win viciously. The women are always associated with chaos, with the sea, in ancient Mesopotamian texts. Yeah. Right. So, back to this, right? At a later time, the Pelasgians are said to have massacred the inhabitants of Lemnos, and to have settled there with some Athenian maidens they had carried off from Attica. Afterwards, these savages murdered both their wives and their children in consequence of such atrocities. Lemnian deeds became proverbial in Greek for horrors and sorceries. It is curious to remark that a certain red clay, terra lemnia, found on the island was, as Pliny tells us, employed as a remedy for wounds, and especially the bite of a snake. This latter may have some obscure connexion with the story of Archimeros. In any case, enough has been said to show that this island was considered a land of mystery and ancient terrors, a fitting origin for the witch Theoris. What a fantastic story, my friends. Literally. You know, I wonder if this guy that wrote the book, I wonder if he himself believed it, you know? Or he knew he was, like, making up bullshit. Right? Right? Pliny the Elder was the main Roman historian from that era, makes no mention of Jesus or miracles, apostles, etc. Right, but he's mentioned a lot in this book, right? Medusa of ancient Greece, the serpent of Asclepius and Hermes, and at their core are all our reflections of Achiram from Zoroastrianism. In the Middle Ages, even French soldiers noted a being in Africa that ate newborn babies, a demon called Lamia. In fact, they were all traced origin to Lotan Tanin, including Ahriman. That's why Babylon, Iraq was destroyed by Cyrus, an American leader. So you're saying the Iraq War destroyed them because of all this devil stuff? No devil spooks, pagan, human sacrifice, hell, etc. in Judaism. They use pagan narratives that associated the serpent and women with chaos to keep women politically and economically oppressed. Right, and today you have people who still hate women so badly that they, like Nick Fuentes, for example. Right? It's like so strange. Right? So, in Rome, black magic was punished as a capital offense by the law of the 12 tables, which are to be assigned to the 5th century BC, and as Livy records from time to time, draconian statutes were directed against those who attempted to blight crops and vineyards, or to spread render pests among flocks and cattle. Nonetheless, it is very evident from the many Latin authors and from the historians that Rome swarmed with occultists and diviners, many of whom, in spite of the Lex Cornelia, almost openly traded in poisons, and not infrequently in assassination to boot. Sometimes, as in the Middle Ages, a circumstance of which the Malleus Maleficarum most particularly complains, the sorcerers were protected by men of wealth and high estates. This was especially the case in the Middle Ages, in the terrible days of Marius and of Catiline, and during the extreme decadence of the latest Caesars. Yet, paradoxical as it may appear, such emperors as Augustus Tiberius and Septimius Severus, whilst banishing from their realms all seers and necromancers and putting them to death, in private and entertained astrologers and wizards among their retinue, consulting their art upon each important occasion, and often even in everyday and ordinary affairs of life. Nevertheless, it must be noted that all the while normal legislation utterly condemned witchcraft and its works, whilst the laws were not merely carried out to their very letter, but reinforced by such emperors as Claudius, Vitellius, and Vespasian. These prosecutions are very significant, and I have insisted upon them in some detail, as I wish to emphasize that stern and constant official opposition to witchcraft, and the prohibition under severest penalties, the sentence of death itself, of any practice or pursuit of these dangerous and irreligious arts, was demonstrably not a product of Christianity, but had long and necessarily been employed in the heathen world, among pagan peoples, and among polytheistic societies. Moreover, there are even yet savage communities who visit witchcraft with death. Accordingly, if we cite the Vincentian canon, called semper, called ubique, called ab omnibus, we might surely say that from the earliest dawn of civilization, witchcraft has been prohibited, hated, and feared. I don't know if it's necessarily true, my friends. I don't know if it's necessarily true that witchcraft was hated and feared. Right? I don't know. Right? Because I think paganism in itself, the worship of many gods, paganism itself, it's also worship of the spirits, right? And the spirits and the energies out there, right? So who's to say which spirit is demonic and which one is of the devil and which one is of a pure spirit, of if they believe in gods, if it's a good god or a bad spirit, you know what I mean? Like, right? At the time of the triumph of Christianity, a decadent empire in the last throes of paganism was corroded by every kind of superstition and occult art. From the use of petty and harmless sympathetic charms of healing to the darkest crimes of goetic ceremonial spells, scrying, conjurations, evoking of the dead, were never more fashionable and never more keenly explored by every class and every order. From the divine Caesar in his palace to the lowsole peasant in his humble shed. That's actually true. That's actually true. And I think Christianity put a stop to all that, and they became the king of the pagans without all the other types of gods being worshipped. Their pagan god, Christianity's pagan god, and gods like they worship Mary and all those other saints, they became the chief gods, the chief pagan, right? Child sacrifice traditions were common in many cultures. In Canaan, children were offered in the name of Moloch. Yeah, exactly. These rituals took place because they attributed magical consciousness to seasonal cycles. Today we know that scarcity, misery, and wars have nothing to do with the magical consciousness of the sky or clouds, and that everything is based on the carbon cycle. Yes, but the fact that, back in 1400s, right, the 1200s, this was written in 1200, right, the fact that 700, 800 years ago, after paganism, the smaller paganisms, right, was blotted out by Christianity, right, the fact that this guy felt the need to reincarnate it in some way, to poke and create such a thing of basically going after people who he suspects to be a witch, when literally most Christians, they probably would have no idea what witchcraft is if for many years, like 1,000 years beforehand, all of their other paganism was blotted out by Christianity, and they were to be Christian and believe in their one pagan deity, Jesus and his mother and all those other saints, right? They took place of the other paganism. So then why did this guy feel the need to reignite the idea of paganism and teach them all about, like, once existed 1,000 years before them, right? And then to suddenly try to create this idea of that there's actually such a thing going on in their midst, right? In their societies, right? It almost makes me feel like maybe this guy who wrote this book was either very bored with his life, or he was dying for some sort of control, right? Like some sort of control and for drama, control, and sadism. Do you know what I mean? Like, does it make sense? Right? Throughout history, the culture was never where slavery, child sacrifice were most common, belonging to the Spartans and the European barbarian tribes. Right. Compared to other empires, the state of Judah had the least occurrence of slavery and war-related deaths. So, right? Like, I don't know if this is something that makes sense. The Jews were the first nation thousands of years ago to discover that nature is governed by invisible forces and the laws of mathematics. Every nation had idols in their temples, yours was the exception. Right, but then when I read about the ancient pagan religions, a lot of them seem to have had the same ideas of Judaism. Not the same ideas as in what is God, but the same idea in their conception of math, spirituality, right? Stuff like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. So, does it make sense? Even though Judaism blotted out paganism altogether from our culture, Christianity came and became the chief of the pagans. But why is this guy going back 1,000 years before Christianity was created and trying to reignite some sort of barbaric past to... What's the purpose? Why was he writing this book? Like, what's his deal? You know what I mean? Like, he's saying what was, right, in this book and how evil it is and all that. And then he's trying to... He used this book as a manual for other people to know, to search for witches in their midst, right? And who should be suspected of being a witch and who would be killed for being a witch and how to kill them and how to torture them. This is what this book is about. So, like, it makes me think maybe this was a way to control people out of fear, right? Because, or maybe he was just bored, you know what I mean? Like, so he says that, you know, in every class, in every order, from the divine Caesar in his palace to the lawful peasant in his humble shed, they all practice witchcraft, according to this guy, right? So, if the disease is universal, the medicine must be sharp. It was very difficult when the infection of a crime was so general to discriminate and draw the line to take into consideration relative differences and nice gradations. So much that was heathen, so much that was bad, was mixed up with what might seem to be simply credulity, and the harmless folk customs of some grandam tradition and immemorial usage, a song or a country dance, may hap innocent enough on the surface, and even pleasing, so often were but the cloak and the mask for something devilish and obscene, that the church deemed necessary to forbid and prescribe the whole superstition, even when it manifested itself in modest fashion and seemed guileless, innoxious, and of no account. Thus, for example, to make the wind to blow, or to drop in a world-wide fantasy which appears harmless enough, the Esthonians, when they wish to raise a wind, strike a knife into a house beam in the direction from which they desire the wind to blow, while at the same time they croon an old-time canzonet. The underlying idea is that the gentle wind will not let any innocent thing, not even a beam, suffer without coming swiftly and breathing softly thereon to assuage the pain. My question is let's go see how did the ancient pagans worship do witchcraft? Yes, ancient pagans did practice forms of what is now called witchcraft, though the modern term is not a direct continuation of ancient practices. Ancient pagans, in the Greek and Roman world, for example, practiced magic such as divination and spellcasting, and some believed in or other persecuted harmful magic, while many modern forms of witchcraft are distinct from ancient paganism. I think that, from what I read, that paganism in and of itself as a religion and the way they used to worship their gods was basically witchcraft, because witchcraft is basically it's manipulating the forces to get what you want, and paganism was the same exact way. They would bring, it was some form of magic where they would bring their offerings and they would try to gain favor and manipulate a deity to do what they want. Yeah, but then this was the concept where paganism and monotheism, for example, and paganism and actual religion there's a fine line between paganism and all religions, which are not necessarily pagan, right? Witchcraft, so let's say witchcraft and religion can be, the lines can be blurred, and it can be, you can almost say that some religions are a form of witchcraft, or not necessarily of witchcraft, but like of magic, right? But what's the difference between all of them, right? So we had this discussion in other videos, right? But basically, the whole thing is a little bit manipulative, and the ideas are all blurred, you know what I mean? Because if you discuss what is paganism, what is witchcraft, and what is religion, what's the difference between them, right? There's almost a line where they're both very similar, and so you could almost say that religion in and of itself is also a form of magic, you know what I'm saying, which is actually forbidden in Christianity and Islam and Judaism, right? I've done extensive reading on the wild rituals of Ugarit, Carthage, and Phoenicia, including the Baal cycle. From the very beginning, the Jews were among the principal founders of human civilization. You have a 3,000-year written history, especially considering that Ugarit was also your ancestor. Ugarit? Who's that? Around 1400 BCE, the Ugarit alphabet existed. Then, by around 12,000 BC, Hebrew was developed, and what we know today as Latin was a cheap copy of the alphabet belonging to the Proto-Canaanites. You were the first to see that paganism was nonsense and witchcraft and sorcery. They believed that the entire universe was governed by good and evil spirits, and that by manipulating these spirits, they could control natural events. Yeah, but that their witchcraft, right, and sorcery was part of their paganism. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Like, that's the idea that I'm trying to think about, right? Alchemy did not develop in Europe for this reason. They saw alchemy as an extension of witchcraft. Alchemy is like the making of, it's basically like ritualistically making stuff like cooking stuff and herbs and all that, and trying to worship in that way, right? Isn't that what it is, alchemy? Unless I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm getting stuff mixed up. Right? Alchemy was an ancient proto-scientific tradition that combines speculative philosophy with practical experimentation. Right. Aiming to create gold from base metals. But the alchemy in religion, right, isn't that like a way of ritualistically playing with matter, like playing with different herbs and stuff and creating something for religious purposes, right? Alchemy is interconnected with religion, often used as a metaphor for spiritual purification and transformation, such as turning the lead of the human soul into the gold of enlightenment. It is historically practiced within and alongside various religions, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and influenced religious and spiritual traditions through its association with concepts like the philosopher's stone, the quest for immortality, and the union with the divine. So I don't know what I'm saying. Right? I don't really know what I'm saying. I don't know. Right? Because I thought something else, right? Like, so you're saying that it's basically alchemy has a deep connection with astrology. For example, the moon was associated with silver and Venus with copper. They believed silver and copper had magical power, then it was mystical. I'm still confused about, like, so alchemy is something else. It's not what I thought. Like, basically taking physical, like, physical matter, you know, physical stuff, like you said, silver, gold, and different herbs, and mixing it and trying to make something in regard to magic and their religion, to create some sort of whatever. Do you know what I mean? For years they believed it was possible to turn lead into gold. Chemistry used to be intertwined with witchcraft, the scientific method developed over time, right? So the chemistry, right, to go and mix stuff, right, and to cook and do all that kind of thing. Am I correct or am I off? Is it cooking? Is it cooking and stuff? It's not a religion itself, but historically and conceptually it has strong ties to religious and spiritual ideas. The idea that it is cooking and stuff is a metaphoric way to understand its physical processes, which has also deeper spiritual meanings. Transmutation of base metals led into noble metals, gold, the search of universal panacea, cure for all diseases. So it's a philosophy that would go and do things with, right? The great work, magnus opus of alchemy, was not just about making gold for many practitioners, but the true goal was inner transformation and spiritual enlightenment. Whatever. In the past, medicine and chemistry were not positivist like modern science. They were intertwined with witchcraft. That is why Solomon's ring was interpreted as part of the esoteric wisdom specific in chemistry. Ergot poisoning. Let's go look that up. Copy. Oh God, my friends. I am really confused. Take LSD? Ergot poisoning is not the same as LSD, but the ergot fungus produces lysergic acid, a precursor to LSD. Ergot poisoning involves ingesting ergot fungi from contaminated grains, leading to a variety of symptoms depending on the type of alkaloids present, while LSD is a synthetic drug that contains lysergic acid diethylamide, not the ergot fungus itself. Okay, and my friends, mold and rye bread and seeds produce psychedelic LSD drug. Really? That's wild. Even today there are ritualistic followers of this tradition. You mentioned a woman in last week's broadcast. In this respect, the Sufi can be considered a continuation of the tradition of alchemy and witchcraft. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Is that the lady that was, she was studying, wasn't she the lady that was studying Kabbalah, right? And she was like a medium or something? Lead poisoning from cups and utensils. And what does lead poisoning from cups and utensils have to do with the psychedelic drug that grows on the bread? Right? My friends, this is not easy subjects. Do you understand? It's not an easy subject. The famous psychologist Jung also published various books on alchemy and dreams. Really? So you told me to go look up Jung, right? in upstate New York, Amherst Town, Wickham. Is Wickham totally? Right? Amazon Junk Alchemy. Yeah. We can read his book at some point, right? So they have it in upstate New York, in a town where they do that type of thing, where they can grow LSD. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Okay, so here it continues on, right? It says, the underlying idea is that gentle wind, according to like the alchemy that this guy is describing, right? So my question here is, why is this guy, you know, if the Christians were so worried, that the Christian leaders were so worried that the masses would be caught up in witchcraft, why would they even, most of the people back then were ignorant and ignoramuses because they didn't know how to read or write. They were peasants. And why would they want to give these people ideas on, like, writing this book? Maybe it was a secret. Maybe this book was a secret until recently, right? Because if at the time this book was for the public, then it would give them ideas. Do you know what I mean? It would open their mind to all different kinds of other practices and ideas, and maybe it would make other people stray, right, from their Christianity. Jung also has his early followers who interpret alchemy based on dream symbolisms and psychoanalysis. That's interesting, because I was also very interested in the dream interpretation and the psychoanalysis. And I don't know if you remember when I showed you that other girl that read Freud's book on dreams, and she was so angry. And right, so let me ask, this book, Malleus Maleficarum, was it secret? Was it a secret book? Was a secret book? No, the Malleus Maleficarum was not a secret book in its time. It was an enormously popular and widely circulated text. So they were basically giving people ideas if they knew how to read back then. So I feel like that defeats the whole purpose of, you know, it defeats the whole purpose of trying to keep the people dumb and uneducated, not knowing about their past and the idea of witchcraft and all that. Do you know what I mean? Like, the whole thing is just ridiculous. Exactly, but we owe chemistry to sorcerers. The same goes for medicine. In the past, medicine and chemistry were the form of wisdom, indistinguishable from magic, from which physics also emerged. It gradually developed from ancient Greece to the Middle Ages. We transitioned from magical thinking to scientific thinking over thousands of years. So basically, science is basically magic. Could we safely say that science is magic? Right? Bunch of false nonsense. I don't know. Is it really? Is it really nonsense? Somebody enlighten me. Somebody enlighten me and tell me. Right? We are here as a result of the collective achievements of human civilization. Exactly. So back to this guy when he says, the Estonians, when they wish to raise a wind, strike a knife into a house beam in the direction from which they desire the wind to blow, while at the same time they croon an old-time canzonet. The underlying idea is that the gentle wind will not let any innocent thing, not even a beam, suffer without coming swiftly and breathing softly thereon to assuage the pain. But at Constantinople, in the reign of Constantine, a warlock named Sopater was put to death on a charge of binding the winds by magic, which he had at any rate essayed to do, whether or no the fact that the corn ships of Egypt and Syria were detained on their voyage by calms and headwinds was actually due to his interference. So he's controlling the wind through magic. Isn't that what they accuse Jews of doing? They accuse us of basically controlling the winds and the weather. Do you know what I mean? They had zero understanding of chemical reactions science until the 1800s. Dalton. Rambam Maimonides was Salahuddin's advisor, physician doctor. He wrote a medical book. Chemistry is just movement of electrons in different shells. Even today there are many mysteries about dark matter and energy. It could also be proven in a century from now that today's physics is nonsense. Newtonian mechanics is nonsense too. Is Newtonian mechanics valid on an astronomical scale or at the level of quantum physics? You guys, I don't know what you're talking about. You know? I think I appear to be more intelligent than I truly am, my friends. Because I don't know much about this stuff. I recommend following Stephen Wolfram. He's one of the greatest living physicists, and says that the mathematical we can create gold in nuclear research physics. I recommend following Stephen Wolfram. He is one of the greatest living physicists, and says that the mathematical theorems we have only explain the computable mechanics of the universe, and that we need new sets of axiom. Roger Penrose agrees and has addressed these in his books, The Bridge of Reality and The King's Mind. Protons, neutrons, electrons, all can be manipulated since atomic age. You guys, this conversation is beyond me, but I'm glad you're having this conversation, because even though I can't understand it, so both of you must know a bit what you're talking about, right? And I actually think it's an honor and a privilege that I have such great brains on my channel. Right? Literally, I have such great brains on my channel that is understands things that I don't. Right? So this guy goes on to say, the guy bound the winds, right? And it was because of him, they say. And they accuse the Jews of being able to control the weather. And they accuse us of witchcraft and all that stuff. The city was nearly starved, and the Byzantine mob, clamoring for bread, was ready to break out into the wildest excesses. In Scotland, witches used to raise the wind by dipping the corner of a plate in water and beating it thrice upon a stone, crooning the following words: I knock this rag upon the stain, to raise the wind in the devil's name. It shall not lie till I please again. That's so funny. So this guy, I wonder if he knew what, I wonder if any of what he's saying about witchcraft is actually true in this book, and he actually knows about it. But the question I would have to ask is, how does he know about all this information? And what good and what use would it have if he basically exposed and gave all this information to the people so that they can all become witches, right? Because it sounds very exciting, you know. You can have some power by like taking a rag, put it on a stone, to raise the wind in the devil's name. It saith not lie, it shall not lie till I please again, right? Say those words, you hit the stone or something of what they say, and you control the wind. It sounds very tempting, you know what I mean? You should read Ian Hacking's book on experiments and observation in science. We have explained very few phenomena. We should not underestimate the transition from alchemy to chemistry. Yeah, I guess. So it will readily be remembered that one of the chief charges brought against the coven of North Berwick witches during the famous trial of 1590 was that they performed incantations to raise a tempest which might wreck the fleet that was escorting James VI when he brought his queen, Anne of Denmark, from her native country to Scotland. So we see that a superstition which, in a little fishing village, when some mother was calling a fair wind for her son, or some lass whistled for a gentle breeze to fill the sails for her sweetheart's trawler, was simple and kindly enough, might yet become dangerous and deadly, at least in intent when launched by malevolent witches who had the will, if not the power, to destroy, and who, if this means failed, would hasten to employ other methods that should prove far more resourceful in their means and efficacious in their results. Accordingly, during the years 319 to 21, a number of laws were passed which penalized and punished the craft of magic with the utmost severity. A pagan diviner or haruspix could only follow his vocation under very definite restrictions. He was not allowed to be an intimate visitor at the house of any citizen, for friendship with men of this kind must be avoided. The haruspix who frequents the house of others shall die at the stake. Such is the tenure of the code. It is hardly an exaggeration to say that almost every year saw a more rigid application of the laws, although even as today, when fortune-telling and peering into the future are forbidden by the statute book, diviners and mediums abound. So then, in spite of every prohibition, astrologers, clairvoyants, and palmists had an enormous clientele of rich and poor alike. However, under Valens, owing to this discovery of the damning fact that certain prominent courtiers had endeavored, by means of table rapping, to ascertain who should be his successor upon the throne, in the year 367, a regular crusade, which in its details recalls the heyday of Master Matthew Hopkins, was instituted against the whole race of magicians, soothsayers, mathematicians, and theurgists, which perhaps was the first general prosecution during the Christian era. Large numbers of persons, including no doubt many innocent as well as guilty, were put to death, and a veritable panic swept through the Eastern world. So he's talking about this time of the Crusades, before he wrote this book, about what happened, and it's interesting because he seems aware that innocent people were put to death, and it seems this book will lead to that again, right? The early legal codes of the most European nations contains laws directed against witchcrafts. Thus, for example, the oldest document of Frankish legislation, the Salic law, Lex Salica, which was reduced to a written form and promulgated under Clovis, who died the 27th of November, 511, mulcts those who practice magic with various fines, especially when it could be proven that the accused launched a deadly curse or had tied the witch's knot. This latter charm was usually a long cord tightly tied up in elaborate loops. Among those reticulations, it was customary to insert the feathers of a black hen, a raven, or some other bird which had, or was presumed to have, no speck of white. This is one of the oldest instruments of witchcraft, and is known in all countries and among all nations. It was put to various uses. The wizards of Finland, when they sold wind to sailors who were becalmed in harbor, used to enclose the wind in the 3 knots of a rope. If the first knot were undone, a gentle breeze sprang up. If the second, it blew a mackerel gale, like a big storm. If the third, it was a hurricane. But the witch's ladder, as it often is known, could be used with far more baleful effects. The knots were tied with certain horrid maledictions, and then the cord was hidden away in some secret place, and unless it were found and the strands released, the person at whom the curse was directed would pine and die. This charm continually occurs during the trials. Thus, in the celebrated Island Maggie case, March 1711, when a coven of witches was discovered, it was remarked that an apron belonging to Mary Dunbar, a visitor at the house of the afflicted persons, had been abstracted. Miss Dunbar was suddenly seized with fits and convulsions, and sickened almost to death. Well, after most diligent search, The missing garment was found carefully hidden away and covered over, and a curious string which had 9 knots in it had been so tied up with the folds of the linen that it was beyond anything difficult to separate them from and loosen the ligatures. Like, seriously, this guy seems to know a lot about witchcraft. I wouldn't put it so far from him to actually be a witch himself. You know, maybe he's a wizard. We don't know. Right? In 1886, in the old belfry of a village church in England, there were accidentally discovered, pushed away in a dark corner, several yards of inkle braided with elaborate care and having a number of black feathers thrust through the strands. It is said that for a long while considerable wonder was caused as to what it might be, but when it was exhibited and became known, one of the local grandmothers recognized it as a witch's ladder, and what is extremely significant, when it was engraved in the folklore journal, an old Italian woman to whom the picture was shown immediately identified it as a La Ghirlanda del Streche. The laws of Visigoths, which were to some extent founded upon the Roman law, punished witches who had killed any persons by their spells with death, whilst long continued and obstinate witchcraft, if fully proven, was visited with such severe sentences as slavery for life. In 578, when a son of Queen Fredegonde died, a number of witches who were accused of having contrived the destruction of the prince were executed. It has been said in these matters that the ecclesiastical law was tolerant, since, for the most part, it contented itself with a sentence of excommunication. But those who consider this spiritual outlawry lenient certainly do not appreciate what such a doom entailed. Moreover, after a man had been condemned to death by the civil courts, it would have been somewhat superfluous to have repeated the same sentence. And beyond the exercise of her spiritual weapons, what else was there left for the church to do? In 814, Louis le Pieux, upon his accession to the throne, began to take very active measures against all sorcerers and necromancers, and it was owing to his influence and authority that the Council of Paris in 829 appealed to the secular courts to carry out any such sentences as the bishop might pronounce. The consequence was that from this time forward, the penalty of witchcraft was death, and there is evidence that if the constituted authority, either ecclesiastical or civil, seemed to slacken in their efforts, the populace took the law into their own hands with far more fearful results. In England, the early penitentials are greatly concerned with the repression of pagan ceremonies, which under the cover of the Christian festivities were very largely practiced at Christmas and on New Year's Day. These rites were closely connected with witchcraft, and especially do Saint Theodore, Saint Aldheim, Egbert of York, and other prelates prohibit the masquerade as a horned animal, a stag or a bull, which Saint Caesarius of Arles had denounced as a foul tradition, an evil custom, a most heinous abomination. These and even stronger expressions would not be used unless some very dark and guilty secrets had been concealed beneath this mumming, which, however foolish, might perhaps have been thought to be nothing worse, so that to be so roundly denounced as devilish and demoniacal, they must certainly have had some very grim signification, which did not appear upon the surface. The laws of King Athelstan, 924-40, corresponsive with the early French laws, punished any person casting a spell which resulted in death by exacting the extreme penalty. During the 11th and 12th centuries, there are few cases of witchcraft in England, and such accusations as were made appear to have been brought before the ecclesiastical court. It may be remarked, however, that among the laws attributed to King Kenneth I of Scotland, who ruled from 844 to 860, and under whom the Scots of Dalriada and the Pictish peoples may be said to have been united in one kingdom, is an important statute which enacts that all sorcerers and witches, and such as invoke spirits and use to seek upon them for help, let them be burned to death. Even then, this was obviously no new penalty, but the statutory confirmation of a long-established punishment. So the witches of Forres who attempted the life of King Doofus in the year 968 by the old bane of slowly melting a wax image, when discovered, were, according to the law, burned at the stake. So people tried to kill him by burning a wax image through witchcraft, right? They were killed. Kill. Read about EPR experiments, CERN, entanglement, freaky, Carl Sagan, science, a candle in the dark, debunks all this nonsense. EPR experiments. Let's go see what that's about. Scary canary. Scary canary. Scary. CERN experiments have moved beyond the original Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen EPR thought experiment, which was a theoretical challenge to quantum mechanics. Recent results from ATLAS and CMS collaborations at the Large Hadron Collider (LHC) have observed quantum entanglements in top quark pairs at the highest energies yet recorded, confirming the predictions of quantum mechanics over local realism, even for massive fundamental particles. So what do I do with this? Somebody help? I don't understand this stuff. I don't understand this stuff. This is for geniuses. I'm not a genius. My friends. Who do you think you're talking to? You think you're talking to a genius here? What's this all about? The church also used accusations of witchcraft to eliminate its own opponents. Exactly. They executed Cathars and Bogomils brutally and inhumane ways. They were agnostic Christians. Carl Sagan has books that are enlightened on the subject of pseudoscience, but still we shouldn't be this strict. Yeah! But let's continue, my friends. The conversion of Germany to Christianity was late and very slow, for as late as the 8th century, in spite of the heroic efforts of St. Columbanus, St. Fridolin, Saint is the S, right? St. Gal, or S. Rupert, S. Willibrord, and the great S. Boniface. They must be saints, right? And many others. In spite of the headway that has been made, various districts were always relapsing into primitive and savage heathenism. For example, it is probably true to say that the Prussian tribes were not stable in their conversion until the beginning of the 13th century, when Bishop Albrecht reclaimed the people by a crusade. However, throughout the 11th and the 12th centuries, there are continual instances of persons who had practiced witchcraft being put to death, and the Emperor Frederick II, in spite of the fact that he was continually quarreling with the papacy and utterly indifferent to any religious obligation. Indeed, it has been said that he was a Christian ruler only in name, and throughout his reign he remained virtually a Muslim freethinker, declared that a law which he had enacted for Lombardy should have force throughout the whole of his dominions. Henceforth, Vacandard remarks, all uncertainty was at an end. The legal punishment for heresy throughout the empire was death at the stake. It must be borne in mind that witchcraft and heresy were almost inextricably commingled. It is quite plain that such a man as Friedrich, whose whole philosophy was entirely oriental, who was always accompanied by a retinue of Arabian ministers, courtiers, and officers, who were perhaps not without reason suspected of being a complete agnostic, recked little whether heresy and witchcraft might be offenses against the church or not, but he was sufficiently shrewd to see that they gravely threatened the well-being of the state, imperiling the maintenance of civilization and the foundations of society. This brief summary of early laws and ancient ordinances has been given in order to show that the punishment of witchcraft certainly did not originate in the 14th and 15th centuries, and most assuredly was not primarily the concern of the Inquisition. In fact, curious enough, Bernard Guy, the famous inquisitor of Toulouse, laid down in his Practica Inquisitionis that sorcery of itself did not fall within the cognizance of the Holy Office, and in every case, unless there were other circumstances of which his tribunal was bound to take notice, when witches came before him, he simply passed them on to the episcopal courts. It may be well here, very briefly, to consider that somewhat complicated history of the establishment of the Inquisition, which was, it must be remembered, the result of the tendencies and growth of many years, by no means a judicial curio, with cut and dried laws and a complete procedure, suddenly called into being by one stroke of a papal pen. I have a question, because this book it's supposed to have been written in 1508, which is about like 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 400, 500 years ago, but somehow what's written in here is about people who lived in the 1900s, like Lenin and Trotsky. So who is, do you know what I mean? Like, is they added stuff later on into this book? I don't understand. Can somebody help me? Can somebody help me? We don't know everything, but could somebody help me with this book? Because it's supposed to have been written in 1508, but it seems that they added Trotsky in here, and right? So yeah, I'm a simple girl, and I'm just trying to learn stuff, but I just can't seem to understand. You know, he lived in 1430. He wrote this book, so then how did Trotsky get in there? You know, he couldn't have known about Trotsky. Trotsky wasn't born back then. So, could somebody tell me what is going on here? Right? The stroke of a papal pen. Right? Could somebody explain to me, like, what's going on here? Right? This brief summary of early laws and ancient ordinances has been given in order to show that punishment of witchcraft certainly did not originate in the 14th and 15th century, and most assuredly was not primarily a concern of the Inquisition. I noted this part, that madness had already been there from the beginning. Right. Right, so, in the first place, Saint Dominic was in no sense the founder of the Inquisition. Certainly during the crusade in Languedoc he was present, reviving religion and reconciling the lapse. But he was doing no more than St. Paul or any of the apostles would have done. I think this is the introduction, so somebody who is, we haven't even gotten into the actual book yet. We are just in the introduction, so that is why whoever's introducing this book is basically describing what was going on there, and also explaining to us about people throughout history, right? So when we actually get into the further chapters, then we will see the real works of this guy, Heinrich Kraemer, who wrote Malleus Maleficarum. We'll actually read his book, but this is an introduction to his book. So we haven't even entered the book yet. Now I understand. The work of Saint Dominic was preaching and the organization of his new order, which received papal confirmation from Honorius III and was approved in the bull Religiosam Uitam, 22nd of December 1216. Saint Dominic died the 6th of August 1221, and even if we take the word in a very broad sense, the first Dominican inquisitor seems to have been Alberic, who in November 1232 was traveling through Lombardy with the official title of Inquisitor Hereticae Peritatis. The whole question of the episcopal inquisitors, who were really the local bishop, his archdeacons, and his diocesan court, and their exact relationship with the traveling inquisitors, who were mainly drawn from the two orders of friars, the Franciscan and the Dominican, is extremely nice and complicated, whilst the gradual effacement of the episcopal courts with regard to certain matters and the consequent prominence of the Holy Office were circumstances and conditions which realized themselves slowly enough in all countries and almost imperceptibly in some districts, as necessity required, without any sudden break or sweeping changes. In fact, we find that the Franciscan or Dominican inquisitor simply sat as an assessor in the episcopal court, so that he could be consulted upon certain technicalities and deliver sentence conjointly with the bishop of these matters, if these matters were involved. Thus, at the trial of Gilles de Reyes in October 1440 at Nantes, the bishop of Nantes presided over the court with the bishops of Le Mans, Saint Breuc, and Saint Lo as his coadjutors, whilst Pierre de l'Hospital, Chancellor of Brittany, watched the case on behalf of the civil authorities, and Friar Jean Blouin was present as the delegate of the Holy Inquisition for the city and district of Nantes. Owing to the multiplicity of the crimes which were proven and clearly confessed in accordance with legal requirements, it was necessary to pronounce two sentences. The first sentence was passed by the Bishop of Nantes, conjointly with the Inquisitor. By them, Gilles de Reyes was declared guilty of Satanism, sorcery, and apostasy, and there and then handed over to the civil arm to receive the punishment due to such offenses. The second sentence, pronounced by the bishop alone, declared the prisoner convicted of sodomy, a sacrilege and violation of ecclesiastical rights. The ban of excommunication was lifted, since the accused had made a clean breast of his crimes and desired to be reconciled, but he was handed over to the secular court, who sentenced him to death on multiple charges of murder, as well as on account of the aforesaid offenses. It must be continually borne in mind also that this is a fact which is very often slurred over and forgotten, that the heresies of the 12th and 13th centuries, to cope with which the tribunal of the Inquisition was primarily organized and regularized, were by no means mere theoretical speculations, which, however erroneous and dangerous in the fields of thought, practically and in action would have been arid and utterly unfruitful. Today, the word heresy seems to be as obsolete, and as redolent of a Wardour Street vocabulary as if one were to talk of a game of cards at crimp or incertain, and to any save a dusty medievalist, it would appear to be an antiquarian term. It was far other in the 12th century. The wild fanatics who fostered the most subversive and abominable ideas aimed to put these into actual practice, to establish communities and to remodel whole territories according to the program which they had so carefully considered in every detail, with a view to obtaining and enforcing their own ends and their own interests. The heretics were just as resolute and just as practical, that is to say, just as determined to bring about the domination of their absolutism as is any revolutionary of today. The aim and objects of their leaders, Tanchelin, Everwacker, the Jew, Manasses is Menashe, Peter Waldo, Pierre Autier, Peter of Blois, Arnold of Brescia, and the rest were exactly those of Lenin, Trotsky, Zinoviev, and their fellows. There were, of course, minor differences and divergences in their tenets. That is to say, some had sufficient cunning to conceal, and even to deny the extremer views, which others were bold enough, or mad enough, more openly to proclaim, but just below the trappings, a little way beneath the surface, their motives, their methods, their intentions, the goal to which they pressed were all the same. Their objects may be summed up as the abolition of monarchy, the abolition of private property and of inheritance, the abolition of marriage, the abolition of order, the total abolition of all religions. It was again this that the Inquisition had to fight, and who can be surprised if, when faced with so vast a conspiracy, the methods employed by the Holy Office may not seem, if the terrible conditions are conveniently forgotten, a little drastic, a little severe? There can be no doubt that, had this most excellent tribunal continued to enjoy its full prerogative and the full exercise of its salutary powers, the world at large would be in a far happier and far more orderly position today. Really. So they're basically saying that the abuse of power of the church might have, if it continued, with the order that they had back then, killing people and all that, the world would be better off? Really? Do I understand correctly, or I'm like totally not? I don't get what I'm reading. Do you know what I mean? They were apparently burning every woman they found in the street and dancing around the fire. This is the conclusion I have reached. Civilized, humanistic people worthy of Jesus Christ. Christianity. And the idea that somehow those people that were accused of being a witch, right? Somehow that they sinned, so therefore it was unforgivable sin, right? To be a witch. And even if they weren't witches, but they were accused of being a witch, that somehow they had to die. And in accordance with Christianity, that goes against the very foundation of Christianity, which is of forgiveness, grace, forgiveness, and turn the other cheek and believe in Jesus and you're saved. But it seems that they had no grace for these people that were accused of being a witch. Do you know what I mean? Christianity is the number one religion that has caused the most deaths throughout human history over a 2,000-year period. Christianity is responsible for half of every 200 deaths. Wow. A political scheme to get rid of elderly women living alone, young girls who avoided marriage, or prostitutes who somehow caught cholera or some disease and contaminated the village. The whole thing is very strange, Like, historians may point out diversities and dissimilarities between the teachings of the Waldenses, the Albigenses, the Heinrichans, the Poor Men of Lyons, the Cathari, the Valdos, the Bogomils, and the Manichees. But they were in reality branches and variants of the same dark fraternity, just as the Third International, the anarchists, the nihilists, and the Bolsheviks are in every sense, save the mere label, entirely identical. So I think what this guy is trying to say is that all of these lunatics that are burning witches and all that are the same as the people who, in any excuse, right, to, because of their theology, right, because of their ideas of whatever it was, they were fanatic and they went about going about what they wanted to do through killing. It's like the same as what the Christians used to do. That this is what the guy is saying. Am I like not understanding, right? Holy forgiveness, right? So Christianity, in essence, the Christians and their leaders and Christianity, in essence, is hypocritical because they don't actually, they won't actually go according to their own book because they refuse to follow their own doctrine, you know, of grace, forgiveness, and being sinners. Like, oh, he who is without sin shall cast the first stone, right? Like, that's a Christian thing. Turn the other cheek. Believe in Jesus and you're saved. But apparently if you're a witch, and even if you turn to Jesus, there's no way out. They kill you. Right? The hypocrisy of Christianity. How embarrassing. Right? One second, I'm gonna make myself a tea. Because I need a tea. Shit. Right? It's crazy. That's what I was saying about, like, from the very beginning, reading about Christianity, how they went about getting rid of all different kinds of paganisms because they wanted to be the chief pagans. They didn't want anyone else to be, you know, they wanted to be the ones that have the most power to control the masses. Right? Hold on. I'm just washing some cups so that I can have a tea. Can I have a chamomilla? Chamomilla. Right? The chamomilla. Alright. Hey. Alright. Got some lemon in my tea. Lemon. The lemon. The lemon. The lemon. Making myself chamomilla. Chamomilla tea. And what I'm going to do, here is my flour, tea, passion flour, passiflora leaf, and sugar. Sugar. Yes, my friends. Here's my tea. Sugar. Okay. Everybody together. Sugar. Christian Gnostics. Many of them were stripped. Let's see what you have to say. Many were stripped completely naked and exposed in public squares. Gnostics is a certain kind of faith, right? It's not like agnosticism. It's Christian Gnostics. Gnostic. It's a religious movement that integrated early Christianity with Gnostic beliefs, emphasizing the salvation is achieved through secret knowledge, gnosis. Right, because agnostic is I don't know, right? It's I don't know, agnostic. Gnosis is no, rather than faith alone. So the agnostics that were into knowing and reading, maybe, because they wanted to be enlightened. Dualism, they believe in dualism. The demiurge, but a lesser ignorant or evil being known as the demiurge, the god of the Old Testament, is often identified with this figure. I'm telling you, Christianity is bizarre. Whatever, it's fine. Listen, this is what makes faith crazy. So they believed in the knowledge, right? So you say that, where are we? Many of them were stripped naked and exposed in public squares. Let Jesus' salvation and mercy remain with him. After causing millions of deaths and transforming entire continents, they began preaching in the name of humanism, like Islam, hypocritical stance in countries like Turkey, Iran, and Syria. After so many massacres. Yeah. EPR experiments show all matter in universe communication between everything. Interesting. Is that what you told me about before? And I looked it up and I didn't understand it, but now you're explaining. Right? Thank you. That is also why Israel is being accused. In Mexico, 500,000, Syria, 500,000, in Sudan, 500,000. In the Congo, 3 to 4 million people have died because of Islam and Christianity. Einstein's spooky action at distance. God does not play dice. Incorrect. Just as Torah, Tanakh, Talmud, and Zohar says, everything is connected. Right? Many Gnostics rejected the divinity of Jesus. They were not obvious. They were an obvious target for the church because they believed in the demiurge. The demiurge. The demiurge. It sounds like a dance, you know? So they believed in a supreme benevolent God, but a lesser ignorant or even evil being known as a demiurge. The God of the Old Testament is often identified with the demiurge. Gnosis, direct, mystical, and secret knowledge of the divine. That's how your salvation comes. And Jesus' role was divine messenger sent by the true God to share this knowledge and help humanity realize its own divine nature and potential. Salvation is the afterlife. It doesn't say here that it doesn't say that they rejected Jesus as God. Did they? Christian Gnostics reject Jesus as God. They just see him as a messenger. Reject Jesus as God. Right? Yes, many forms of Christian Gnosticism reject Jesus as God in the same way Orthodox Christianity understands it. Very nice. So they were actually doing the right thing, because technically, if Christians believed in the God of the Tanakh, right, in the God that took us out of Egypt, who's invisible, and they believed that Jesus was a messenger and is not divine, that can actually be considered as close to Judaism as it can get. Do you know what I mean? In regard to another religion. Right? That's wild, my friends. Wow. Isn't this interesting? Is this interesting, or is it like completely... This is a very nice tea. Very nice. Okay. Take that. Put it there. Okay, in fact, heresy was one huge revolutionary body exploiting its forces through 100 different channels and having as its object chaos and corruption. The question may be asked, what was their ultimate aim in wishing to destroy the civilization? What did they hope to gain by it? Precisely the same queries have been are put today. With regard to these political parties, there is an apparent absence of motive in this seemingly aimless campaign of destruction to extermination carried on by Bolsheviks in Russia, which has led many people to inquire what the objective can possibly be. So unbridled are the passions, so general the demolition, so terrible the havoc, that hard-headed individuals argue that so complete a chaos and such revolting outrages could only be effected by persons who were enthusiasts in their own cause and who had some very definite aims thus positively to pursue. The energizing forces of this fanaticism, this fervent zeal, do not seem to be any more apparent than the end. Hence, more than one person has hesitated to accept accounts so alarming of massacres and carnage, of wholesale imprisonments, tortures, and persecutions, and has begun to suspect that the situation may be grossly exaggerated in the overcharged reports of enemies and the highly colored gossip of scaremongers. Nay, more partisans have visited the country and returned with glowing tales of a new utopia. Right, so I think it's saying that there's a reason why humans actually don't believe reports of genocides, you know, like real genocides, not like what's going on in Gaza. We're not talking about war, we're talking about like mass slaughter of people, or even wars. They won't believe in the atrocities that happen during wars, right? Because I guess it's the motive, right? Like, what's the end goal? And because of the brutality of it, and I don't understand what I just read, right? So it says here, hence, more than one person has hesitated to accept accounts so alarming of massacres and carnage, of wholesale imprisonments, tortures, and persecutions, and has begun to suspect that the situation may be grossly exaggerated in the overcharged reports of enemies and the highly colored gossip of scaremongers. Nay, more partisans have visited the country and returned with glowing tales of a new utopia. It cannot be denied that all this is a very clever game. It is generally accepted that from very policy, neither an individual nor a junto or confederacy will act even occasionally, much less continually and consistently, in a most bloody and tyrannical way, without some very well arranged program is being thus carried out, and determinate aim ensued, conditions and objects which in the present case it seems extremely difficult to guess at and divine, unless we are to attribute the revolution to causes the modern mind is apt to dismiss with impatience and intolerance. I don't know what I just read, my friends. Don't know. Right? It is in Latin, hundreds of volumes. Yes, many Gnostics believe in a single God. Most saw the demiurge as the one and only God of the universe. The idea of a single God traces back to Plato. But they still believed in duality. They still believe in two forces, which is also not Judaism. We don't believe in two forces. We believe in God and God alone. Right? So, most of the demiurge as the one and only God of the universe. The idea of a single God traces back to Plato. This Kraemer produces an overview. Right, so it's like an introduction, right? So, right, it is terrifying that people who freed their souls from polytheistic Rome were targeted by these crazies who believed in man was God. History has such unexpected turns. When the church targeted thousands of women, were their families pardoned? I don't think so. While spreading Christianity to pagan Europe, they used these accusations as a pogrom method to kill and eliminate those who resisted. Right, and where is the idea of forgiveness? It sounds like they don't really practice what they preach, my friends. Oy vey. What if I put milk in my... What if I put milk? Is it like still fresh? Yeah, very nice. Let's see, I can do that. Mix it. Mix it. Very nice. Right? One second. Right? Doesn't look good or it tastes good. Right? There were also those who did not believe in duality, the Hermetic culture based source of everything in a single God. Oh, Western esotericism had a monist belief. The Christians of today, they don't believe, like, I don't understand all this. I don't understand all this. Dualist thoughts spread under influence of the Persian Hinduism, and China belonged to the East. Western esotericism, however, was essentially monist. Christianity condemned Europe to thousands of years of darkness, carrying out pogroms against the representatives of this thought. You know, I don't know if humanity ever was not violent. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think regardless of religion, like, and regardless of which religion you're part of, you know, like, when I was back in New York, my father was telling me how in China, right, there is these, going back thousands of years, in China, there is the Chinese intrigue, right, and there's Chinese conspiracies, and they themselves have, like, different wars going back thousands of years among their clans and their tribes, and Chinese culture. I'm not exactly, I don't remember exactly what my father said, but, right, like, for example, excuse me, Chinese culture, tribal clans, 4,000 years ago, right? Like, around 4,000 years ago, Chinese culture was in a transitional period from Neolithic age to early Bronze Age, characterized by the emergence of social hierarchies, fortified settlements, and the rise of early states. Excuse me. Generally associated with the legendary Xia dynasty and the archaeological Erlitou culture. This period saw the integration of various regional Neolithic cultures, moving beyond simple tribal clans towards more complex political systems. Right? Likely including a ruling elite and slaves, replacing earlier primitive societies of great harmony, patriarchal system, blood relationships were paramount for social connection and unity. Warfare and fortified settlements, increased conflict in later Neolithic and early Bronze Age led to the construction of defensive structures. Were they violent? Were they violent? That's the question. That's the question that has to be asked, my friends. Yes, archaeological evidence dictates that Chinese cultural groups and their neighboring clans, tribal clans around 4,000 years ago, during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, were involved in frequent and often large-scale violence and tribal warfare. They have proof of this: mass burials and skeletal trauma. This is before Christianity or anything. Do you know what I mean? Human sacrifice. Like, I don't know if there was any period in time where humanity didn't have some form of excuse of killing everybody and everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It feels hopeless. You know what I mean? Like, when you think about, you know, the violence. Western esotericism is known as monist Christians played a role in many disasters such as the Black Death and the Inquisition. With their belief in an anthropomorphic God, and they wasted hundreds of years until returning to Judaism. Is non-epiphanic monotheistic teachings. We owe the European Reformation to Platonic thought and the monotheistic core of Judaism. We stopped imagining nature as the domain of magical powers. Right. Let me ask. Chinese culture, tribal clans 2,000 years ago, were they violent? I mean, you know, AI is not the most, you know, they're not the most reliable. I would have to go and start reading books, you know, on Chinese culture. There's one book I was reading. It's called Geisha, and it's nasty, right? Yes, Chinese culture, tribal clans, and neighboring nomadic groups around 2,000 years ago were involved in frequent and often large-scale violence and warfare. Violent genocides. Large-scale massacres are what modern scholars might term genocide or mass killing, as a deliberate strategy of warfare and state consolidation. Mass killing is policy. States such as the Qin in 3rd century BCE articulated and practiced an official policy of attacking not only territory but also people to ensure rivals could not recover, a strategy that facilitated mass killings. Large armies and casualties. The era saw the rise of massive state conscripted armies, and battles often resulted in tremendous casualties. Treatment of conquered populations. While the goal of empires was often to incorporate and rule conquered populations, sometimes via enslavement or forced assimilation, rather than total eradication, resistance or perceived threats could lead to extreme violence. Specific incidents in modern interpretations. Wars with the Xiongnu. The Western Han Dynasty engaged in massacres of Xiongnu people between 133 to 91 BCE and beyond, which some scholars categorize as mass killings. Extermination of the Qiang. The Eastern Han Dynasty similarly engaged in the extermination of the Qiang people in 169 CE. Then it goes on to say more about Ran Min order. A notably slightly later example occurred in 350 CE when the Han Chinese general Ran Min ordered the extermination of the Ji people, a non-Han Wuhu group. Woohoo! Leading to the... I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny. The woohoo sounds funny. Leading to the massacre of around 200,000 people and the group's eventual disappearance from history. The Chinese did systematic killing throughout history. You know, nobody talks about it. So, this makes me think that, basically, humanity has an issue. Do you know what I mean? Humanity has an issue. The West has always been more brutal. Rome and Sparta were the epitome of the empires, and states where slavery and death were most widespread. But with the advent of Christianity, they turned their back on every kind of civilized progress. Pope banned 0 for centuries as satanic, with algebraic numbers, and had laws claimed all sickness, disease was from sin. No germ, virus, or genetic cause was allowed to be investigated in the 1700s. Right. That's why when somebody got a fever, for example, in the Middle Ages, they would say they're demonic, they're possessed, and they would call a priest. And they wouldn't allow, like, a healer to come and heal, or to give him any sort of medicine, right? Claimed to know these things caused diseases, sickness, not sin, and was banished. Ignaz Semmelweis, sounds Jewish, no? Was Hungarian, was one of the first people to claim unknown things caused disease, sickness, and was banished. Joseph Lister and Listerine was first physician to sterilize his hand during surgery, childbirth. All his patients lived, while 80% mortality rate is if no antiseptic. Wow. That was the Royal Society of Physicians, England, 1800s. Church dictated science, then insanity, evil. Right. This is nasty. Right? Yeah. Should I go swimming? Too easy. Should I go swimming? You see, I can't even get through the introduction because there's too much information. Do you know what I mean? Pasteur later came out with germ theory of disease was accepted. Pasteur. Right, so back to the book. It says here, nearly a century and a half ago, Anarcharchist Klutz, the personal enemy of Jesus Christ, as he openly declared himself, was vociferating God as evil. To me then, Lucifer, Satan, whoever you may be, the demon that the faith of my fathers opposed to God and the church. This is the credo of the witch. Although it may not be generally recognized upon a close investigation, it seems plain that the witches were a vast political movement and organized society, which was antisocial and anarchical, a worldwide plot against civilization. Naturally, although the masters were often individuals of high rank and deep learning, the rank and file of the society, that is to say, those who, for the most part, fell into the hands of justice, were recruited from the least educated classes, the ignorant and the poor. As one might suppose, many of the branches or covens in remoter districts knew nothing and perhaps could have understood nothing of the enormous system. Nevertheless, as small cogs in a very small wheel, it might be, they were carrying on the work and actively helping to spread infection. It's an extremely significant fact that the last regularly official trial and execution for witchcraft in Western Europe was that of Anna Goeldi, who was hanged at Glarus in Switzerland on the 17th of June, 1782. 7 years before, in 1775, the villain Adam Weishaupt, who had been truly described by Louis Blanc as the profoundest conspirator that has ever existed, formed his terrible and formidable sect, the Illuminati. The code of this mysterious movement lays down, it is also necessary to gain the common people, das Gemeinvolk, to our order. The great means to that end is influence in the schools. This is exactly the method of the organization of witches. And again do writers lament and bewail the endless activities of this sect among the young people and even the children of a district. So, in the prosecutions at Wurzburg, we find that there were condemned boys of 10 and 11, 2 choir boys aged 12, a boy of 12 years old in one of the lower form of the schools, the 2 young sons of the prince's cook, the eldest 14, the youngest 12 years old, several pages and seminarists, as well as a number of young girls, amongst whom a child of 9 or 10 years old and her little sister were involved. Can you imagine? So, like, little children were condemned to death for being part of the Illuminati. You know what I mean? Caligula, he was a madman, wasn't he? We spoke about him, I think, in my channel. Right? Europeans were ignorant lunatics. Arabs, Moors, Asians were educated. We are living in a very good time to be alive. France and Algeria did exactly what Hamasinians did. Wow. Genocide, torture. In Algeria, it's the Algerians, right? The Latins were always brutal. All mankind has good and bad people. True. Tyrants often use religion, race, culture to justify evil. Gotta go. Bye. Yeah. Just like, what's his name? Mr. Mizrahi, right? He called himself rabbi. He uses God to excuse himself for going around having sex with women outside his marriage. Like, he's a sicko. You'll always have those kind of people, right? So, okay, one second. Hold up. Wow, that's scary. This guy went to Dubai, but they try to hide. You know, the Arabs, they still have a slave trade. You know, anybody that goes to their countries, they looking for work, they confiscate their passports, and then they basically make them slaves, and no one cares. Wow, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, my friends. Okay, let me check what's going on with the pool. Should I go? I don't know if I want to go. What's today? Today is Monday. Monday, right? Yeah. Very nice. I can go. There's women's time today. It's already 7. Should I go swimming? I don't know if I have the energy. It's healthy. It's healthy to go swimming, my friends. Right? Healthy. Aren't women and children convenient targets to accuse in order to incite an entire village and congregation? Yeah, maybe. Caligula, we spoke about Caligula and how he went mad and he was killing everybody, right? If you go to my channel, you can see I spoke about it. Let's go to my channel and let's see if we can talk about Caligula. Caligula Shmirchik. Let's see if it comes up from my channel. Or just go to my own channel and here, Caligula III. This is where I spoke about.
Hi.
4 years ago.
I don't know if you can hear me. This headset. Father who was like second in line to the throne, and he kills his father. His father was like a general in the army, and when he was like 7 years old, he lost his father, and then the Tibetan, or the second Roman emperor, he took his mother, killed her, put his sisters in exile, or they were living with his uncle, and then what happened was that he grew up, you know, his father died, he grew up in fear that he's going to be killed by this second emperor, and then that second emperor had a grandson. Basically, the second emperor had a son, but someone killed him, you know, because they wanted to take over the throne, so he had a grandson, and then that grandson was going to be the successor to the throne, but he was still a child, so he thought to take this Caligula and to make him emperor to the throne. as like co-emperor, him and his grandson, you know. But before then, he took Caligulus and he locked him up in his castle where he lived, and this Caligulus never knew if he would die, if he would live, because this emperor was neurotic, you know, and oh my god, the drama that goes through this stuff is like unbelievable. And then, basically, he became emperor. He killed his rival, who was the second emperor's grandson. Killed him to get him out of the way. And then he brought his sisters. Once he was emperor, Caligulus became emperor. He brought his three sisters, to live with him. And in the palace, because he had missed them. He had missed growing up with them, and they lived apart. And they lived with his uncle, and his uncle was his father's brother. And turns out that his sisters wanted the throne. One of them, she was really, really wanted the throne. And 1 second, I'm getting on the bus. Wow. 1 second. Yeah, I'm on the bus. So basically, his one sister, she told her brother, she said, I can give you a son, and then your throne is stable. You know, you can have a heir to the throne, and according to the Roman law, is that if she had his son, then she would be the next empress. You know, she's the mother. So
this was during
so he had sex with his sister. Hi, hello. So he had sex with his sister, and then she didn't get pregnant after 3 months. So he's like, okay, she's useless. And then he decides to sleep with all his sisters. Not all of them, just the 2 good. And he got really close with his second sister, and she was like the most beautiful one. And it's like a perverted story. He got her pregnant, and he was really close with her. Then she got sick and died. They couldn't save the baby, so then he went mad. Then he started to kill everyone, and then the Senate of Rome, they decided to kill him, and they put his uncle on the throne. And after watching that, before I came to work, it just put me in a really rotten mood, because it's just like, you know, you see him, they acted out really well. You see him as like a young kid, and he's a really cute child, and seeing his father die and everything else, and then so that put me in a bad mood at work. Remember? He became emperor, and he ruled for 15 years, and he ruled well, you know. And then his uncle, Marcus.
Right. So then basically what happened was that he got killed by the people of the Rome. Right. Aren't women and children convenient targets? The record of Arabs. Isa, I spoke about it a long time ago, and I didn't remember the story. So now I listen to myself, and I'm being educated by myself 4 years later. Isn't that cute? One of the most traumatic figures in my life after Baghdad, Osama bin Laden and Muhammad. New York's always are no longer as safe as they used to be. This is actually in Israel. I was in Israel, not in New York subways. So, right. So it's talking about the Illuminati here, right? And 1 second, page 26. 1 second. I want to see how many pages it is. The introduction. It's a long introduction. Wow. My friends. Bruder und Schwester. Mein Bruder und Schwester. Right? 1 second. My Bruder und Schwester. Right? So that was just the introduction. So if we go back to page 26, because, you know. If you know, you know. Right? So now we're up to the political operations of the witches and the Illuminati and how they were arresting children, right? You've been in Israel. A disgusting person who hangs out with his sister and all his relatives and he's Roman. Yeah, you've been in Israel since 2017 actually. I was here since 2017. So, I'm positively Israeli. It's women's time, right? So, if I go swimming, it should be fun. Even though exactly. Okay. So let me see. Till 9 o'clock. Women's till 9 o'clock. Should I just leave it here? X, the true fairy. What's this? What's this? White Lives Matter. This is a young white girl who was victim of a white hate crime in Chicago. A black man poured gasoline on a white woman, then set her on fire. Right, the girl that was... Black man was walking through the train, holding a bottle, and approached victim, 26-year-old woman with her back toward him. He poured liquid over her head and tried to ignite it. According to the criminal complaint, the woman fought him off and ran toward the front of the train as the man chased behind. The man ignited the bottle in his hand, dropped it, and later picked it up and lit the victim on fire with the bottle. The complaint said he then ran to the front of the train car and stood watching as her body was engulfed in flames. He needs to get the death penalty. She was burned to on the 60% of her body. She had a Black Lives Matter badge on her social media. White Lives Matter. Sicko. He needs to get the death penalty. It's really scary, my friends. Very scary. We live in a very scary world. You know? That's frightening. Right? Is this you? Sahar lover? All these crazy sons of bitches are trying to incite Muslim and Christians in Israel against you to wipe you out of Israel. Yeah. Monsters, I tell ya. I tell ya. It's like really bad news, my friends. Again, innocent and young girls brutally targeted in the United States. Yeah, it's frightening. Let's put on a song to make ourselves feel better. Okay? Let's put on a song to make ourselves feel better, okay? Let's end off with a song, and then I'm gonna go swimming. Right? Okay. Then we'll come back on. We're up to page 26 of 338. Page 26, up to the political operations of the witches in many lands were at their trials. Right? It's speaking of the trials. I'm gonna go swimming maybe, and then I'm going to come back. Right?
No have I O Hawaii, O sands of my birth, my native home. I rejoice in the blessings of heaven. O Hawaii, aloha, aloha. Happy youth of Hawaii, rejoice, rejoice. Gentle breezes blow, love always for Hawaii. E ha'i mai ko mau kini lani e. May your divine people speak. O mau kua, aloha e Hawaii. Your loving people, O Hawaii. Nā mea oli no ka mahau no luna mai. The holy light from above. E Hawaii, aloha e. O Hawaii, aloha e haoli na oki o Hawaii e. Oli e, oli e. Mai a e makani e pa mai e. Au ke aloha, no a ke apua e mai amo.
God protects you.
O makua, o no aloha ne.
I don't know who these people are. They shouldn't knock at my door because I'm not going to open. Shouldn't open. Thanks.
With beloved riches,
Ko mau kahagai o lino mau.
your ever glistening streams,
Ko mau mala puanani e.
your beautiful flower gardens,
E aomi na oki o Hawaii e.
happy youth of Hawaii.
Oli e.
Rejoice!
Rejoice! Rejoice!
Honestly, I don't know who these people are. You know what I mean? I don't know who these people are coming to my house. You know what I mean? No idea. I want to go swimming. It's probably a good idea to go swimming. Hopefully. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't go swimming. It's just like very strange. Like people should just like leave me alone. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's been real. Thanks for being here, and we'll get through this book as much as we can. You know what I mean? We'll get through this book. we'll get through we'll try to get through it, put it that way. And if we see it's getting boring when we actually start the book, then we will not continue. Right? It's just experimentation, right? Now we'll go on to another book. We'll go into another book of some other book that I have here. There's many books to read, my friends. Anyway, have a great day. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. It's been real. And see you next time. Amen, Wattis. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.